They say karma doesn't wear a watch, but that afternoon she showed up right on schedule. Karen Whitfield stood on her immaculately pruned front lawn, mouth hanging open like a stunned trout, watching in slow-motion horror as a bright yellow tow truck lifted her pristine white SUV into the air. The mechanical whine of the hydraulics sliced through the quiet suburban air like a knife. Officer Martinez stood beside her, calm and composed, the sunlight bouncing off the handcuffs at her side like a silent warning. All around, neighbors emerged from houses like curious prairie dogs. Some leaned against porch rails with coffee mugs in hand, others feigned interest in their flower beds, peeking up just enough to catch the action. I stayed on my porch, motionless, phone in hand, recording every beautiful, glorious second. After 3 excruciating months of entitlement, harassment, and illegal parking violations, Karen was finally being served the justice she had earned. And let me tell you, it was spectacular. To understand how satisfying that moment was, you need to know how it all started. 3 months earlier, I moved into Willowbrook Estates, a neighborhood so obsessively pristine it could pass for a movie set. The lawns were trimmed with ruler precision, mailboxes were required to match, and the homeowners association bylaws were thicker than a courtroom trial transcript. I use a wheelchair due to a spinal injury, so the designated handicap parking space in front of my townhouse wasn't optional, it was legally required and absolutely essential to my independence. The space was clearly marked with bright blue paint, official signage, and was properly registered with both the city and the HOA before I even moved in. That's when I met Karen Whitfield. Karen was the self-declared Queen of Willowbrook Estates, the president of the HOA for 4 consecutive years, and a woman who treated bylaws like divine commandments, except when they applied to her. She was in her early 50s, always dressed like she had a standing brunch reservation at the country club, and had an infuriating way of delivering insults disguised as politeness. From the moment I arrived, she eyed my handicap spot like it was a blemish on her otherwise flawless kingdom. The trouble started within my first week. I returned from a physical therapy appointment to find Karen's white SUV parked squarely in my designated handicap spot. I wheeled up to her front door, rang the bell, and explained the situation, politely even showing her my placard and documentation. She smiled with that sugary condescension only people like her can master and said, "Oh, honey, I was just running in for a few minutes to grab some papers. Surely you can park somewhere else just this once." She didn't budge. I had to park 3 blocks away and wrestle my wheelchair over cracked sidewalks just to get home. That was only the beginning. Karen made a habit of parking in my spot at least twice a week. Every time I brought it up, she offered some flimsy excuse, picking up dry cleaning, unloading groceries, only for a moment. I filed a formal complaint with the HOA. Karen responded with a letter stating that parking violations were low priority and would be addressed when feasible. The kicker. She signed it as HOA president, meaning she was effectively dismissing a complaint against herself. At monthly HOA meetings, I tried to address it publicly, citing ADA regulations and city laws. Karen sat at her folding table at the front of the room, tapping her manicured nails on her notebook, smiling that thin smile, and saying things like, "We all need to be flexible with our community resources," or, "Perhaps you could consider the needs of your neighbors too." The rest of the board either nodded silently or avoided eye contact altogether. Karen ruled through sheer intimidation. So I started documenting everything. Every time Karen's SUV was illegally parked, I took photos, clear shots of the license plate, the handicap signage, and timestamps. Karen noticed and didn't like it. She confronted me one evening, accusing me of harassment. She even sent a formal letter claiming that taking photos of her car created an unwelcoming environment and violated HOA policy. The irony was suffocating. One particularly infuriating afternoon in October, I returned home to find her SUV not just in my spot but blocking the striped access aisle needed for my wheelchair ramp. That day, I just finished an exhausting physical therapy session. I was sore, tired, and furious. I wheeled up to her house and knocked. She opened the door, wearing pearls and a silk blouse, clearly headed to some social event. "Oh," she said, glancing at my wheelchair like it was an inconvenience, "I'm running late for a luncheon with the mayor's wife. You'll have to wait until I get back this evening." I paused, breathed, smiled. "Of course, Karen, I completely understand." I wheeled back to my house, pulled out my phone, and called the city's parking enforcement division. I explained the situation calmly. The dispatcher assured me someone would be sent within the hour. And 45 minutes later, right on cue, Officer Martinez arrived, followed closely by a tow truck driven by a burly man named Pete. They got straight to work. Martinez began taking her own photos, Pete started prepping the tow. That's when Karen came bursting out of her front door like a reality show contestant who'd just been voted off the island. "Officer, officer," she cried, "there's been some mistake. I'm the HOA president. I was just moving my car." Martinez barely glanced up. "Ma'am, this vehicle has been parked in violation of Municipal Code 12-4 for over an hour. We have photographic evidence and a filed complaint." Karen's voice shifted into high-pitched entitlement. "This is absolutely ridiculous. I live here. I serve this community. Surely we can talk like adults." Then, in a final swipe, she pointed at me. "He's just trying to cause trouble because he doesn't like me." Martinez was unmoved. "Ma'am, ADA violations are enforceable by federal law. Your HOA status does not override municipal code. Please provide your license and registration." And that's when Karen made her first critical mistake. "I'm not giving you anything until I speak to your supervisor," she snapped. "This is harassment. He's been stalking me for weeks." Martinez took a step closer, hand near her radio. "Ma'am, you are required to comply. Failure to provide identification constitutes obstruction of justice." Karen's face went crimson. "I am not some common criminal. You cannot treat me like this." Then came her second mistake. She stepped between Pete and her SUV, arms wide, blocking the tow. Pete gave Martinez a weary look. "Lady, you need to move. I'm just doing my job." Karen stood firm, jaw clenched. "I'm not moving until someone with authority handles this. This is my neighborhood." Martinez unclipped her handcuffs, her voice calm, professional, and final. "Ma'am, you are now under arrest for obstruction of justice and interference with official duties. Your vehicle is also being impounded under ADA enforcement protocols." Karen's defiance shattered. "Wait, what? You're arresting me? I volunteer at the library. I organize fundraisers. This is insane." But it was too late. Martinez turned her around, cuffed her, and began reciting her rights. Karen's voice rose with desperation. "Call my husband. Call the mayor. You don't know who I am." At this point, the whole neighborhood was outside. Mrs. Patterson was filming with her phone. The Johnson kids had set up lawn chairs. Even old Mr. Henderson cracked a smile, something I'd never seen before. Karen's SUV began its slow ascent onto the flatbed. She twisted in the officer's grip, screaming about responsibilities and board meetings, but no one moved to help her. Martinez opened the squad car, guided Karen inside, and shut the door on her wailing voice. Pete fired up the tow truck and rolled out like a conquering hero. As the police cruiser pulled away, the gathered crowd began to murmur, some clapping, others shaking their heads in disbelief. I just sat there on my porch, phone still in hand, a quiet satisfaction blooming in my chest. Karen spent the night in jail. She faced charges of ADA violations, obstruction of justice, and interference with official duties. Fines totaled over $3,000. Her arrest became public record, word spread quickly. She was removed from every volunteer committee she had once lorded over. At an emergency HOA meeting 3 days later, the vice president read a short resignation letter aloud. Karen was done. Even better, the HOA implemented strict new policies on accessible parking enforcement. And 2 weeks later, I received a call from the HOA's lawyer. Due to liability concerns stemming from her arrest, Karen was permanently barred from holding any position of authority within the association. Her empire of control had collapsed. Karen received 18 months probation, mandatory community service, and a mark on her record that would follow her into every important luncheon for the rest of her life. Witnesses said she sat quietly during her final sentencing, eyes fixed forward, finally understanding what accountability really looked like. Justice, it turns out, doesn't need to shout. Sometimes it arrives with flashing lights, a tow truck, and a calm, steady voice saying, "You're under arrest." And I wouldn't have changed a thing. Love seeing karma in action? Subscribe for more real stories where justice rolls in, sometimes with handcuffs, sometimes with a tow truck. Like, comment, and share if you've ever dealt with a neighborhood nightmare. You won't want to miss what's coming next.